Recently, we went to Nottingham. Hi, I'm Rich Trippin.
I'm
And
Jeannie.
we like the UK. And we're trying to learn about the UK. Recently, we was on a trip to Nottingham. And we went to the Nottingham Castle and walked around and seen all the Robin Hood lore, but then we walked into a room, but not just any room, it was a special room. You ever seen this room? You've seen this room. She was in the room. Here's evidence she was in the room. This room was talking about two things that we have never heard of, and I thought I heard everything. I've heard of scones. And once you know scones, you pretty much know everything about the UK. But we walked in and there was something special going on. It was a complete exhibit on Monet. We didn't understand art. But before that, we went into a room that was talking about the British Civil War, and I was shocked. Personally, I was shocked because I thought there was only one Civil War that ever happened in the world, and that was the American Civil War. Because that's all we ever know. Did you ever know there was another Civil War besides the American Civil War?
No.
No.
I'm sure there was, but
I'm sure there was, but we was never taught that. So unbeknownst to me, I'm walking around and they're like, here is so-and-so from the Civil War, and here's a diary from the Civil War. Here's so-and-so from the Civil War. And I was like, they are really obsessed with the Civil War. And then I realized, no, this is the English Civil War. And I looked at Tiffany and I said, what is the English Civil War? She had no idea. So we posted the video of Nottingham. You can watch it right here, but then we looked up and said, you know what we need to do? We need to learn the Civil War, but we can't learn it alone. We need you guys to help because you guys always put really good information down at the bottom of stuff that the video missed. So today we are watching, would you like to add something?
I think we covered it.
We are going to watch a video called The English Civil War. It's a crash course. It's kind of going to do the brief overview because the other videos was 3 hours long.
Yeah.
I thought you guys could handle it, but Tiffany said you couldn't. But this is by Crash Course. This is we got a lot of subscribers, so we're assuming that they know what they're doing. Let's watch the video.
Hi, I'm John Green, and this is Crash Course European History. So, as we saw last week, absolutism was in the air during the 17th century, but not just in France. Across the English Channel, King James VI of Scotland became King James I of England after the death of the childless Elizabeth in 1603, and he found himself thinking, you know, I might not agree with those French Catholics about everything, but they are on to something when it comes to the divine right.
So James the First, not stopping, but we're going to talk about what we know. James the First. You're a little bit more in this than I am.
Yes, that's Mary, Queen of Scots' son, correct?
I think so.
I think so.
Because it's Elizabeth that died.
Yeah.
She had no heir.
Yeah,
So-
so then it's him.
Okay.
Of kings to have absolute power. The inhabitants of the British Isles, however, weren't so sure. In fact, Protestant reformers were imagining a different idea of government. That's right, my friends. The constitutions are coming. So when he inherited the British throne, James aspired to unite his holdings in Wales, England, Scotland, and Ireland into a more cohesive whole. But of course, those regions, despite their geographic proximity, contain quite a lot of religious, ethnic, and economic diversity. Religiously, Calvinists, called Presbyterians in Scotland, Catholics, and Anglicans had big disagreements. Also, if you've
Okay, I gotta stop this for a second because before we get into this, I would say one of the few royals that people know about is Mary, Queen of Scots, and Elizabeth, and she was the son of daughter of King Henry VIII. And that was just a treacherous battle of royals trying to maintain power.
Elizabeth and Mary?
Yeah,
Yeah.
she did for Scotland. And Elizabeth was trying to rule it for England. And she managed to get Mary, Queen of Scots' head cut off,
After being in prison for 19 years.
only for her to die.
Yeah.
Mary's son to.
Take over.
Yeah, it just seems all pointless, don't it?
Yeah.
It just all
really.
seems like you think it's like the direction of the kingdom, but realistically, and it's probably for Scotland, for England. And at the end of the day, it's like you thought it was two different crews, but it's all the same crew.
you've ever been to a Scottish bar and accidentally said how much you're enjoying your visit to England, you will know that Scottish people are not English. True story, by the way, the entire bar went quiet all at once. It was really uncomfortable, and then I tried to fill that silence by saying, well, you have the same money, which also didn't go over great. James thought he could solve these problems by taking the title of King of Great Britain, one place, one king. He also had his officials institute English laws across all his kingdoms and promote adherence to Anglicanism, and he sought to keep the peace among Europe's great families by marrying his son Charles to Henrietta Maria, the Catholic sister of Francis Louis XIII. But that only ended up furthering divisions because Henrietta Maria refused to convert to Anglicanism and became a target for opponents from various factions. Henrietta Maria's husband, James's son Charles, came to the throne in 1625, and he too firmly believed in the divine right of kings because, of course he did. He was backed by the nobility and about half of the gentry, or the wealthy landowners who were below the nobility, but other members of the gentry opposed the idea of absolutist monarchical power, as did many other less powerful people, including many farmers and much of the merchant classes who tended to live in cities. Those groups didn't have titles or ancient claims to land, but they were driving much of Britain's economy, and they felt that the elected English Parliament should have more power, because of course that would also mean that they had more power. In 1628, Charles bowed to that parliamentary strength by agreeing to the Petition of Right, which said that the king could not raise taxes without Parliament's permission. But then he was like, I think I might have found a loophole, and he basically ghosted them. He simply stopped calling Parliament back into session, which of course infuriated Parliament, and also felt like a rather blatant absolutist move from a king who had just agreed to a check on his power. Meanwhile, Puritans, who objected to the pomp of Anglicanism with its statues and stained glass and incense, resisted the Archbishop of Canterbury named William Laud, who was attempting to bring the Puritans back to Anglican orthodoxy. Puritan critics were tortured, sometimes put into the stocks or whipped. Some had their faces mutilated, as were members of the upper classes who disapproved of the king and his administration. Then Laud stirred up defiance among the Presbyterians in Scotland, whom he also aimed to restore to Anglicanism. He pushed them to adopt a new version of the prayer book of the Anglican Church, and resistance to that was literally riotous. Young women hurled the new prayer books during religious services and provoked their congregations to join them. In fact, the Presbyterian Scots were eventually so enraged that they invaded England. In response, after more than a decade of refusing to summon Parliament, Charles was like, Parliament, can you come back, please? I need your support in declaring war. Like many a ruler, Charles I thought that warfare, which he undertook on numerous occasions, would make Parliament rally around him and allow him to raise taxes. But that was a big mistake. Instead, the representatives responded by removing Archbishop Laud from power, decreeing that Parliament must meet at least every 3 years, and putting additional roadblocks in Charles's way. When Charles called on soldiers to arrest the members of Parliament who had thwarted his demands, outright civil war erupted. Between 1642 and 1646, those loyal to the king, called Cavaliers, faced off against those loyal to Parliament, called Roundheads, because of their short haircuts. Parliamentary forces raised the New Model Army, led by Oliver Cromwell, and this new army saw opposing religious sects let go of their differences, which allowed them ultimately to capture Charles I and then execute him in 1649. We also have to remember that during these years, the Little Ice Age was taking its toll. Many people died from famine. Furthermore, between 1625 and 1636, the bubonic plague killed some 45,000 people in London alone. Amid successive bad weather, entire villages disappeared as their inhabitants either died of illness or starvation, or else abandoned their communities in search of food. And all of that enhanced the resistance and criticism of those who found it impossible to pay more taxes so that Charles could realize his absolutist dreams and fight his wars. A higher percentage of Britain's population died in this period than during both World War I and World War II.
See, that's the thing. Like, I think it takes more than just an unfair government to raise that type of revolution. He was hitting everything.
Yeah.
He was hitting everything. He went to a time that everybody was probably suffering.
It sounded like it. If they weren't suffering one way, it was another.
Yeah, and you're looking at a time that people, even like right now, that when you go to farmers and you go to the UK, one of the surprising things that we noticed going through the UK is how much of it was farms. Like majority of the UK was farm. Driving down the interstate, what the M4, whatever you guys call your interstate, there, your main highway. It just surprised me that the majority surrounding you was farmland.
Mm-hmm.
So I would
It's
imagine
beautiful.
it was very pretty, but you're looking at this, the majority of this country relies on farming. So now you're looking at people who, if they're doing a little ice age, you already know that the UK is nowhere near as warm as here in Florida.
Mm-mm.
It stays cold. You can imagine them crops was suffering. And then you had the bubonic plague. And then the king comes in and he's like, well, we're going to make everything more expensive for you.
So in a time of already a rough time, like a time of need, he's just gonna make it worse.
How would you like to be like, okay, I don't have any money to pay the taxes. I got just enough to pay our taxes. And you get a letter that's like, well, you're going to have to pay a little bit more. And then you walk into your room and you're like, I'm going to pray to God the way my father prayed to God for help. And then they're like, well, no, you ain't going to do that either.
No.
You ain't going to do that either. And that's enough to
Yeah, that sounds awful.
drive people crazy, I think.
War II combined. But with the war ended and Charles defeated, England was now a republic, although not quite like contemporary republics since it was ruled by the increasingly dictatorial Oliver Cromwell. Although come to think of it, that does make it like some contemporary republics. Cromwell was still the head of the new model army, but without a shared enemy in the king, all those varying sects and religious factions went back to squabbling with each other until Cromwell wiped out those in the new model army who objected to the policies of his Puritan regime. Cromwell's army, for instance, crushed the Catholics in Ireland, whom it was suspected favored a restored monarchy, but even so, Cromwell could not keep his army or his government unified, despite building a very impressive network of spies. In 1658, after less than a decade in power, Cromwell died, and as civil war once more seemed inevitable, in 1660, Parliament summoned Charles II to the throne. Did the center of the world just open? Is there a wig in there? Am I going to have to put that on, Stan? So this was the time in English history when the wigs that I, at least, associate with English history and fancy British people started to be a thing. What purpose did they serve? Well, then as now, they were a way of concealing hair loss, but also people like to cut their hair short to minimize the risk of lice. So now I'm worried that this wig that Stan gave me has lice, and we're going to move on with the video. So Charles II was summoned by...
Okay, I don't want to keep stopping the video, but I want to make a mental point. So there was at least a 10-year reign that the UK did not have a king. Cromwell, they killed, what was it? They killed Charles I?
Yeah.
So for 10 years after Charles I, Cromwell was the leader of the UK. So during this, the UK did not have a king. That's interesting.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I was actually reading about the, I guess the line of monarchs.
Yeah.
The other night, starting at Mary and Elizabeth.
Yeah.
And I don't remember if it mentioned about Cromwell.
Because he wasn't a king.
Because he wasn't a king, yeah.
I wonder, is there other times that there was no king, or was this the only time that there was no monarchy, like, leading over the UK? And it's amazing that when Charles died, that the other, I guess because it would have been like rush into your grave with just a bunch of people, because it seems like anytime a king died, somebody rushed to take their place.
Yeah.
Now it's like, I have the bloodline. I have the bloodline. It seemed like for 10 years, everybody's like, man, you're the next king. I don't know what he's talking about. No. Cromwell have it.
By Parliament to become the English king. And you might be wondering why someone who'd seen his father executed for being King Charles I would want to become King Charles II, but humans are moths that fly toward the light of power, my friends, and Charles II thought he could be a better king. In some ways, he was. His reign began the so-called Restoration, a time of creativity and discovery and also further tragedy. In 1665, another outbreak of plague quickly killed some 30,000 people. The next year, fire broke out in London, destroying more than 10,000 buildings, including many churches and businesses. The monument to the Great Fire of London encapsulates just how thoroughly religious disagreements shaped every facet of human life. Even when memorializing the dead, the monument's inscribers couldn't help but make it sectarian, writing, "Here, by permission of heaven, hell broke loose upon this Protestant city, the most dreadful burning of this city, begun and carried on by treachery and malice of the popish faction." Now, of course, that wasn't true. The fire started in a bakery run by an Anglican. Charles II, meanwhile, had a Catholic mother in Henrietta Maria and was seen to be gravitating toward what that monument called the popish faction. He loosened restrictions on Catholics and other dissenters, a move Parliament responded to with the Test Act of 1673, which excluded sectarian, writing, "Here, by permission of heaven, hell broke loose upon this Protestant city, the most dreadful burning of this city, begun and carried on by treachery and malice of the popish faction." Now, of course, that wasn't.
They blamed the London fire as a Catholic terrorist attack. I had to read that again.
Yeah, to comprehend.
Yeah, they blamed it. They blamed the London fire, the Great Fire of London, on the Pope. I guarantee there's people out there that still think so.
Probably.
And maybe it was. I don't know. Sometimes we just brush things over. I'm not trying to, rekindle what do they call it? A theory, conspiracy theory. But could have been.
True. The fire started in a bakery run by an Anglican. Charles II, meanwhile, had a Catholic mother in Henrietta Maria and was seen to be gravitating toward what that monument called the popish faction. He loosened restrictions on Catholics and other dissenters, a move Parliament responded to with the Test Act of 1673, which excluded all those who weren't loyal to the Anglican Church from government positions. So just for a quick recap, James I tried to unite all of Great Britain and Ireland under one absolutist crown before dying in 1625. His son Charles I ended up being on the losing side of the English Civil War and was separated from his head in 1649, at which point Britain technically became a republic that more closely resembled a military dictatorship, which eventually failed, leading in 1660 to Charles II becoming king. Charles II had at least 12 children, but none with his wife, so his rightful heir was his brother James, a Catholic, who would eventually become king, but only for a few years. But before we get there, let's go to the thought bubble. Across these decades, people saw the social order turned upside down as some male reformers proposed free love and women took up arms, even carrying them openly during the 1640s and 1650s. One pro-parliament woman recalled seeing the leader of the Irish rebels approaching, writing that she, quote, "sent him a shot in the head that made him bid the world good night." Other women began publishing and preaching, with Quaker women.
She was a hard bastard. She was a hard bastard.
So was that kind of like a feminist movement?
I don't know if it was a feminist movement as much as it was just the story of the times.
Yeah.
Because what he just said was it was very chaotic during that time. We always say during like our time that we live in a time of uncertainty, but that's repetitive through history.
Yeah.
That you obviously this is a time of not so much peace, but seemed more like guerrilla warfare.
Mm-hmm.
Like there wasn't like an official fight happening, but everybody stayed strapped because they did not know who was going to circle the block. That's an American slang. Look that up.
Emphasizing the divine light shining from all humans, both male and female. And with the political scene fluctuating so rapidly and alliances changing, women served many roles, including as spies, even going to other countries to gather intelligence on those plotting to restore the monarchy, or when it was restored, those plotting to overthrow it again. Among these was Aphra Bain, daughter of a butcher and midwife. She was pro-Stuart, the family name of James and Charles, and traveled incognito to the Netherlands in in the 1660s to gather intelligence on Stuart enemies. However, Bain also picked up another career, soon becoming a popular playwright at a time when, as part of the world turning upside down, women began going to the theater and serving as actresses. Before that, men had taken women's roles in plays.
Wow.
In 1688, the year before she died, Bain published Orinoco, the story of a wrongly enslaved African prince and his love for a high-born slave woman. In this regard, Bain was part of a thriving Restoration literary scene, which rejected Puritan austerity in favor of wit, sexual desire, and playfulness. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So despite the efforts of Aphra Bain and her ilk, the Stuart drive for absolutism halted for good in between 1688 and 1689, when the Catholic ways of James II just became too much for the pro-Parliament advocates, and when, to compound the danger, James's second wife gave birth to a son and heir. James's older daughter Mary and her spouse William III were summoned as monarchs to replace James II, but only after they agreed to rule by a Bill of Rights. This document stated in its first article that no monarch would reject or publish a decree without the consent of Parliament. It also guaranteed some of the rights later found in the U.S. Bill of Rights.
This is a dumb question. Is that King James? Is that the King James?
From the Bible? Who wrote the Bible? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, the King James version. Was he King James II or King James I?
I think it was the first. So I think it was Mary's. Was it Mary's
Father?
son?
Oh, maybe it was that
Mary, Queen of Scots' son, James?
one. Maybe?
I don't know. I forget. I looked it up before, but I don't remember.
Wait, was he the one that rewrote the Bible?
I think.
When he said rewrite the Bible at the beginning, was that the Bible that he sent the Scottish?
I don't know.
No.
No.
They said Charles did that.
No. Yeah, Charles said that. So no. But
See, that's the thing about British history.
I'm
Like,
gonna Google.
in order to explain one piece, you have to skip over a million things. So 1604, and this is the 1660s. So this was the King James before this King James.
mm.
Okay.
Yeah, he was the son of Mary. Queen
So
of Scots.
Mary, Queen of Scots' son, was the one who rewrote the King James Bible.
Mm-hmm.
See how it just glazed over that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, I understand why it glazed over that, but that's a testament to British history. That's what I'm saying. Everybody's like, Richard, why do you like British history so much? Tiffany, why do you like British history so much? It's because of this. In order for us to talk about this, we have to go through so many things. It completely changed everybody's lives and how we see the world today, rather whatever, in order to talk about this point.
And Mary, Queen of Scots, which I already knew, was a devout Catholic.
Yeah.
And then James I was the one who retranslated the Bible and Protestant.
He was Protestant?
So when the Protestant James I became king of England.
So Mary, Queen of Scots' son was Protestant.
Yeah.
Okay. So did he become Protestant to unite?
I think so.
Was so much stuff happens.
See, I was going to say that in the beginning, that he's the one that rewrote the Bible, but I was slightly confused because where it's James and Charles and Charles and all these names repeat, and you just have to remember the first, the second.
I mean,
how many
we're just
of them
talking about
are.
this.
It's
We
like
just-
hard to keep straight in your mind.
Yeah, we just skipped over so many events. Like we skipped over the plague and all that, talking about the singular thing.
Mhm.
That's just insane to me. That just like here's one important thing, but in order to talk about this important thing, we got to brush over 100 other things. That's British history is just insane.
Including, for instance, the right to bear arms, at least as long as you were Protestant. And it's important to note that political theory underpinned this political transformation, which came to be called the Glorious Revolution. And this is the part in European history where we usually talk about Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. Thomas Hobbes took a very pessimistic view of human nature and argued for an absolutist form of political organization in his book Leviathan. It argued that a lack of political regulation created lives that were, quote, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. In Hobbes's worldview, with absolute rule, one surrendered any claim to personal liberty, but received in exchange a measure of personal well-being and protection from that absolutist government. But there was another famous English theorist of government and human society, John Locke, who presented a much rosier view of humanity in his 2 treatises of government. Locke argued that in a natural world, individuals were born free and equal, but that they rationally banded together to create a government that would uphold laws and protect their rights. So Locke is seen as articulating a theory of government similar to the one put forth by the Glorious Revolution, and also similar to the one outlined in the preamble to the US Constitution. And in many ways, Locke's political thought is the foundation of traditional or classical liberalism, that is, the belief in rights and freedom as intrinsic to the human self.
Another thing for the British to say.
What?
Even our Constitution was originally thought of in the UK. Which, I mean, technically it was thought up by British people because the Revolutionary War was a civil war.
Yeah.
So it was really British people who, but realistically, because of that butterfly effect, was the Civil War sparked by common thinkers of John Locke. So are we watching something else like the Bible thing earlier to this right now? Are we watching another thing? It's just like watching a firework go off and everything that British history has to say. It's just going to go in every different direction. It's just going to be bright and shine in every different direction. So we're seeing, we'll just finish. There ain't much left.
And we see this theory amplified from Locke's time down to the present day. Like today, many of us take it for granted that humans have certain natural rights, including the rights to life, liberty, and property, language taken directly from 2 treatises. But human rights are an invented concept, albeit a very useful one. King Henry VIII, for instance, did not agree with the notion that those who claimed to own land actually owned it, as evidenced by his extensive reclamation of Catholic land for himself. The creation of concepts of human rights reminds us again that how we imagine the world, and indeed how we imagine ourselves and each other, deeply impacts the world in which we end up living. Whether we believe in human rights and how we act on that belief has profound consequences today, just as it did during the Glorious Revolution.
So from what I'm taking from that is the English Civil War, or you'd say the British Civil War, was almost like a growing pain for Parliament.
It seemed like the first steps of the end of
Monarchy
rule.
Yeah, it seemed like the people was getting tired of it. And it seemed like there was a certain amount of we can't let go. Like the monarchy finally caved in and said, we're going to have a parliament. It's going to be like 50-50. We're going to talk this out. And then it's like, no, we're not going to do that.
No.
And that's kind of...
I wondered how it became like how it is today.
Yeah.
Where it's more Parliament and
the Prime Minister and Parliament and
versus just the King.
Yeah. And now it went from, but I think it's the idea of this is probably the first step, which I would say the Parliament was probably the first step.
Yeah.
But the English Civil War was probably the first step to the King just not having power and then becoming a republic.
Yeah.
Because I believe Britain's a republic. Google that. Is Britain a republic? It's a constitutional monarchy. Okay. But they say constitutional. I guess it's called I guess that's a play on words. I don't know how, because realistically, it's not really a monarchy, is it? Because realistically, could King Charles come in at any day and say, I'm done with this whole Parliament stuff. Power's going back to me. And I understand the whole idea of that, and what that would cause. But I'm saying, is he within his right to do that, or did Parliament take away all that power?
From what this is saying, the current head of state is King Charles III, who primarily fulfills ceremonial duties. The UK's government led by the Prime Minister, is responsible for making and implementing policy.
Well, I know every time a prime minister wins the election, they go to the king. And they say some type of words like, I grant you to form a government in my name. Something like that. That's
Okay.
that's what the government says.
Hmm.
But is that just, what is it called now?
I don't know.
Like, could he say, could a prime minister win the election? He can just be like, no,
Not you.
not you. We don't want you. Is that a thing?
I don't know. And if they wanted to, if the king wanted to, could they let them win but then take them down? Like, all right, I had enough of you. Goodbye.
Yeah. See, that's what because this seems like what they was trying to do in this was to make sure that did not happen anymore.
Yeah.
So I learned what the English Civil War was, but guys, this is a normal thing that we clarify. If you think that we're off base or something, leave a comment down below. That's what this whole thing is. This is not a reaction channel. This is a learning channel. We are learning and you guys are helping.
Yeah.
So
whatever we said that's wrong,
tell us.
tell us, because you're part of the conversation.
Yeah,
This isn't a two-person
No,
conversation.
this is and give me something. It's shocking. The whole thing. I don't know. Let's go. Like the video. Tell your friends. I'm Rich.
And I'm Tiffany.
And that was the British Civil War.